Attention! JustProfessor here. You think you can predict what will happen by studying patterns and calculating odds. You think if you just gather enough data and run the numbers, you'll know what's coming. But real life doesn't follow the neat rules you think it does, and treating it like a predictable game is setting you up for disaster. Imagine you're really good at poker. You know all the odds, you can calculate probabilities in your head, you understand game theory. So you figure you can apply those same skills to business, relationships, life decisions. You treat everything like it's a game with fixed rules and calculable odds. But here's the problem. Poker has defined rules. Real life doesn't. Poker has a limited set of possible outcomes. Real life has infinite possibilities you never considered. This is the ludic fallacy, treating real-world situations like they're games with known rules, when actually, the most important things that happen are the things you never saw coming. The ludic fallacy gets its name from the Latin word for game, ludus. It's when you take models, calculations, and frameworks that work in game-like situations and mistakenly apply them to the messy, unpredictable real world. You act like life follows neat probability distributions and predictable patterns, when actually the most important events are extreme outliers that your models never accounted for. In a game like roulette or blackjack, everything is defined. You know all the possible outcomes. You can calculate exact probabilities. The rules never change. There are no surprises outside the game's structure. So mathematical models work perfectly. But the real world isn't like that. The real world has unknown unknowns. Events you never imagined, rules that suddenly change, black swans that appear out of nowhere and destroy all your calculations. The problem is that games and models feel scientific and rigorous. They give you a sense of control and prediction. So people fall in love with them and start treating reality like it's just a big, complicated game. Financial analysts build elaborate models to predict markets. Strategic planners make detailed 5-year plans. Experts calculate risks based on historical patterns. And then something completely unexpected happens that wasn't in any of their models, and everything falls apart. Let me show you where the ludic fallacy destroys people. The 2008 financial crisis is a perfect example. Banks had incredibly sophisticated mathematical models to calculate risk. They had PhDs in mathematics working on these models. The models said that what happened in 2008 was essentially impossible, like a once-in-10,000-year event based on their calculations. But it happened anyway. Why? Because their models were based on game-like assumptions about how markets behave. They assumed certain things would never happen because they'd never happened in their data. They treated finance like a game with predictable rules when actually it's a chaotic system that can do completely unexpected things. The people running these models felt so confident because the math looked solid. They had probabilities and distributions and risk calculations. It all seemed very scientific. But they were playing games on paper while reality was doing something completely different. The ludic fallacy made them think they had the situation under control when they were actually blind to the real risks. This happens in strategic planning constantly. Companies make detailed 5-year plans based on models and projections. They calculate expected revenues, anticipated market conditions, predicted competitor actions. Everything is laid out like a game plan. Then something happens they never considered. A new technology disrupts their industry. A pandemic shuts everything down. Consumer preferences shift in unexpected ways. All those careful plans become worthless because reality doesn't follow the neat game-like rules the plans assumed. Personal finance advice falls into this trap too. Financial advisors tell you to calculate your retirement needs, project investment returns, plan for specific scenarios. And this planning is useful to a point. But it's also ludic fallacy thinking. You're assuming the future will follow predictable game-like patterns. You can't actually predict what your life will look like in 30 years. You don't know what crises or opportunities will emerge. The most important financial events in your life might be things you never saw coming. A health crisis, an unexpected opportunity, an economic collapse, a technological shift that changes everything. Military strategy has a long history of ludic fallacy mistakes. Generals plan battles like chess games, calculating moves and countermoves. They run war game simulations. They develop elaborate strategies based on assumptions about how the enemy will act. Then the actual battle happens and nothing goes according to plan, because war isn't a game. The enemy does something unexpected. Weather changes everything. A random event creates chaos. The plan falls apart because reality is messier than the game-like model. Sports analytics shows both the power and limits of game-like thinking. In actual games like basketball or baseball, statistical analysis works pretty well because you're working within defined rules. You can calculate probabilities and make predictions that are reasonably accurate. But even in sports, the ludic fallacy appears when people get too confident in their models. They think they figured out the perfect strategy, then a team does something unexpected, or a player has an outlier performance their model said was impossible. The difference is that in sports, surprises are relatively bounded. Even an unexpected outcome still happens within the rules of the game. In real life, surprises can completely break all the rules you thought existed. That's where the ludic fallacy becomes really dangerous. Risk assessment in general is plagued by the ludic fallacy. Companies assess risks by looking at what's happened before and calculating probabilities based on historical data. But the biggest risks are often things that never happened before. The terrorist attack no one imagined. The pandemic that wasn't in the risk models. The technological disruption that came from an unexpected direction. You can't calculate the probability of events you've never conceived of, but those are often the events that matter most. Academia sometimes encourages ludic fallacy thinking. Economists build elaborate mathematical models of how markets work. Political scientists create frameworks for understanding political behavior. Sociologists develop theories about social patterns. Some of this modeling is useful, but there's a danger in mistaking the model for reality. The model is a game with simplified rules. Reality is infinitely more complex. When experts forget this distinction, they make confident predictions that turn out to be completely wrong because reality did not follow their game-like model. So, how do you avoid the ludic fallacy? How do you use models and calculations without falling into the trap of treating life like a predictable game? First, remember that models are tools, not reality. A model might help you think about something, but it's not the same as the thing itself. The map is not the territory. When you're using any kind of framework or calculation to make decisions, keep in mind that you're working with a simplified version of reality. The real situation has complexity your model doesn't capture. Second, prepare for the unexpected, instead of just preparing for calculated risks. The ludic fallacy makes people focus all their preparation on scenarios they can calculate probabilities for. But the events that matter most are often the ones you never thought to calculate. Instead of asking, "What are the most likely problems?" ask, "What would completely destroy me that I haven't thought of?" Build general resilience and flexibility instead of just defending against specific calculated risks. Third, be humble about predictions. Anytime you're making predictions based on models or historical patterns, remember you might be completely wrong. Don't bet everything on your calculations being correct. Leave room for being surprised. This doesn't mean models are useless, just that you shouldn't treat them as a certain truth about the future. Fourth, pay attention to things that don't fit your model. When reality starts diverging from what your game-like model predicted, that's crucial information. Don't ignore it or explain it away. It might mean your model is missing something important about how reality actually works. The ludic fallacy makes people double down on their models when they should be questioning them. Fifth, recognize that some domains are more game-like than others. Actual games with defined rules are appropriate places for mathematical modeling. Stable systems with consistent patterns are reasonable places for some calculation, but chaotic systems with lots of unknowns, like economics, geopolitics, technological change, are much less game-like. Don't treat everything like it's roulette just because roulette is easy to calculate. Sixth, value practical experience over theoretical models. Someone who's actually lived through various real situations has knowledge that game-like models can't capture. They've seen the surprises and outliers. They know reality is messier than the neat calculations suggest. Don't dismiss this kind of wisdom just because it's not mathematical. The ludic fallacy makes you overconfident in your ability to predict and control outcomes. It makes you think you understand risks when you've only calculated the predictable risks and ignored the uncalculable ones. It makes you treat life like a game that follows neat rules when actually life is messy chaos that constantly surprises you. Models and calculations have their place. They're useful tools for thinking about certain problems, but they're not reality. They're simplified game-like versions of reality that leave out most of what matters. The biggest mistakes come from forgetting this distinction and treating your models as if they're reliable guides to what will actually happen. Real life is not a casino where all outcomes are known and all probabilities can be calculated. It's not a chess game where you can think 10 moves ahead. It's not a simulation where the rules are defined. It's complex, chaotic, and full of surprises. The most important events, the ones that change everything, are usually the ones nobody saw coming and nobody had in their models. This doesn't mean you should throw out all planning and calculation. It means you should hold your plans loosely. Build flexibility and resilience rather than elaborate predictions. Prepare for being wrong rather than assuming you've calculated everything correctly. And most importantly, stay humble about how much you actually know about what's coming. The next time someone presents you with confident predictions based on mathematical models, ask yourself what assumptions they're making. Ask what their model might be missing. Ask what happens if the game-like rules they're assuming don't actually apply. The ludic fallacy is everywhere in modern thinking because models and calculations look so scientific and rigorous. But looking scientific and actually capturing reality are very different things. Watch the next video to discover another bias making you overconfident about predictions.